Morning, everyone. Happy Hastu Great Binyet Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's senior political correspondent, Rachel Wearmouth. Morning, Rachel.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions, and the best ones do, of course, get a News Agenda mug. Woohoo! Who doesn't want one of those? So, what have we got? Well, we've got a lot of stories to get through today, and we will not be discussing the one that's on the front page of the Mirror, which is about England footballer Mason Greenwood being arrested for rape and assault. Because he's been arrested, that means we are now bound by contempt of court rules. And those mean we cannot discuss anything that might prejudice a future jury trial. And everybody, whatever you think about that arrest, wants that case to get the right result. So please don't discuss it in the comments. Now, what we are going to talk about starts on page 5, where the Mirror is reporting that Boris Johnson is increasingly confident on whatever planet he's in orbit around, that he can ride out Partygate, despite claims denied over the weekend that Carrie danced with friends to The Winner Takes It All in the Downing Street flat at an illegal gathering on the day that Dominic Cummings left the building. And his assertion, also made over the weekend, that he's on a mission to rid the country of the bad smell that is this Prime Minister, because, as he put it, he's only interested in the bongs of Big Ben and legacy infrastructure projects that would be a monument to himself. So, Rachel, take us through this. How is it possible for a Prime Minister to be confident with what's going on? How do things really stand in Westminster? Because we've got this hiatus between the report being ordered and the report being published. The Met's muddied the waters nicely, but the backbenchers have gone very quiet. So what's the real mood in the Tory party?
It's kind of hard to tell, because I think there's a few different groups, and I think they all feel slightly different about it. One kind of wants him to have a big shake-up of the operation in Downing Street. There's another group that just want rid and are kind of keeping their powder dry until Sue Gray's report arrives, potentially as early as today. And then there's the other group which is backing Boris Johnson to the hilt. But I think sort of part of Boris Johnson's strategy at this point is to kind of look like they're in control, look like they're strong. So bring forward quite a few other things for reporters like us to talk about, such as levelling up. There's also the big Ukraine crisis, which Liz Truss was out speaking about at the weekend. But then you've still got furious briefings coming out from the Conservatives that are really sceptical about Boris Johnson. And over the weekend, one Tom Tugendhat, who is the chair of a Commons committee, he's come out to say that he would stand if Boris Johnson decided to or was pushed out of his job. So that kind of that sort of sets up the debate. You know, everyone will be thinking about what Tom Tugendhat thinks of an issue, and it's kind of like it's like a stalking horse has emerged, which makes it, you know, which will make the process just more difficult for Boris Johnson now.
Yeah, now, Tom Tugendhat, though, is the MP for Tunbridge and Malling down here in the People's Own Country of Republic of Kent. And he's also been sort of fairly nakedly jockeying for the leadership for about a year at least. Yeah. He's been going to the border of Belarus, speaking Arabic to migrants at the border wire, taking the mail on Sunday with him, and causing the Prime Minister some headaches as well over the Afghanistan airlift and things like that. So it's hardly a surprise that he might throw his hat in the ring. And like you say, there's a stalking horse now. There's one person that things can sort of coalesce around, which I think is the role that Michael Heseltine performed back in the early 90s, while things sort of build elsewhere on the fringes for the real contenders who then come in, and the stalking horse drops out in return for a nice government job later on. Who knows? That's just one of the many Westminster conspiracies we get. But so Boris Johnson, then, despite all this, is he really confident, or is he just pretending to be confident?
I think he kind of has to try to project confidence, doesn't he? He has to sort of look prime ministerial, if that's still possible for him. So I think he's got a lot of people briefing on his behalf, trying to make him look like, you know, that he is this strong leader who, you know, can be really tough on Russia and can do all the things that you'd expect a prime minister to do.
Look prime ministerial. The man doesn't even put a clean suit on. He doesn't brush his hair. He just never looked prime ministerial, which is probably how he got the job in the first place, of course. But you know, ask us your questions, everybody. What do you think about the Sue Gray report and how things are going? Do you think that Boris Johnson is in a better position than he was last week? Maggie says, if Johnson finds more ways to delay Sue's report, is she brave enough to publish and be damned? She is his employee. He is the head of the civil service. So it's very unlikely she'd be able to publish it without him. So we'd have to just wait and see on that. But what will happen is when she does publish it, she will give the Prime Minister a couple of hours, cited those things first, then it will get published on the .gov.uk website, and then the Prime Minister will be giving a statement in the House of Commons about it soon afterwards, whenever this theoretical thing actually arrives down the chimney. Now, Hallie says, is the Metropolitan Police's job to protect Downing Street at any cost? If you're stood outside and there's a terrorist coming in, that's exactly your job, isn't it, Rachel? But it's not. It shouldn't be Cressida Dick's job. And she's also, someone pointed out to me over the weekend, she's also been stopping an investigation into Tory sales of peerages that they've decided not to investigate, when that's arguably a lot more important than the COVID rule breaking.
Yeah, I think the Met Police really is going to have to start to do something to restore people's faith in that force, really, because I think the perception of how they're behaving is really starting to get to a lot of people. You know, it's kind of it was starting to intensify, I guess, around when, you know, there were the Sarah Everard protests, how they've dealt with various other different things. They just kind of, you know, they're there to serve the public essentially, and it doesn't just feel like at this point perhaps that, you know, a lot of legal experts, for example, pointed out last week that there's no reason why Sue Gray's report would have to make minimal reference to the events that the Met Police are investigating, and that rather her report shouldn't be hampered by it. So kind of a lot of people are wondering, well, why did the Met put out a statement saying that should be the case?
Exactly, because those were talking about fixed penalty notices. And the things the Met's investigating are the juiciest bits, the best bits and the worst bits. So it's kind of interesting that they're the bits we're not supposed to know about, especially if it's only going to get a fixed penalty notice at the end. Jacob says, we really need to hear the court's voice. I think they might have a voice for the people. It's not really going to get to court, even if they just issue a fixed penalty notice because someone has organised an illegal party. They pay the fine, and that's that. Same as if you get a speeding ticket. If they refuse to pay the fine, if they want to argue about it, then it goes to a magistrate's court. And a magistrate sitting alone will make a decision about whether or not you pay a larger fine. It doesn't ever get to a jury, doesn't ever get to a judge. There is no right of appeal. So if you are found to be in breach of coronavirus rules, you don't really get to go to court per se in the way that you might expect, or to have the people judge you. Deborah says, it's a conflict of interest. She shouldn't be doing it. I think she's talking about Cressida Dick. Why not make them pay all the money they've wasted making their friends and their families rich? I don't think they haven't got that much money. I mean, Boris Johnson can't afford wallpaper, Deborah. It's very unlikely he's going to find $4 billion down the back of the sofa, no matter who he knows. But the mood, as the questions there are showing, Rachel, the mood in the country still isn't this great about whatever the mood in Downing Street is. The mood elsewhere isn't. This weekend, Michael Gove's published a white paper for levelling up, which is what they sort of stood for and got elected for. It's how they got a lot of red wall MPs and therefore a big majority. And it's turned out to be it's full of recycled money, partial refunds, and promises to do things that a white paper can't do. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but the white paper means that these levelling up plans will spend 6 months to a year in public consultation, end up being watered down before they get anywhere near being put in a legislative bill, which then probably isn't going to get through Parliament in time for the next general election, which means there's no meaningful levelling up. There's no chance of spades going in the ground. And all the people that voted Tory last time are not going to see the benefits of that, which if you want to be re-elected, they need to see. Why would the Tories be this stupid about the thing that got them elected?
Well, I think as we've just been talking about, the idea is to get people talking about, just something else, anything else other than Partygate, essentially. But what these plans look like, and we haven't actually seen them yet. They're not out yet. They're due out this week. There seem to be, as you say, a lot of recycled money, and like every problem that the government's promised to solve brought under like one banner. So apparently the obesity strategy will be in there. Some of their housing plans will be in there. And again, it will be some of the things that they've already been doing, like sprucing up some town centres or what have you, just like put all under this one banner so that people within the government can kind of say, we're doing something about this thing. But I think from what we're hearing about it, it's kind of going to be extremely underwhelming. So I think it might kind of backfire, and that like the job that it's supposed to do is to move people on from talking about Downing Street parties, when I think it might underline, in fact, that the government's not doing a great deal. And as you say, not doing it anytime fast.
Yeah, that basically emphasising the fact they've been partying hard and not working hard, which is, you could forgive the partying hard if there was some working going on and things were getting improved. But there we go. Now, there is, Michael says, levelling up should be renamed robbing Peter to pay Paul, because in fact, that's what it is. Reducing money to local government throughout the UK and then rechanneling it into Tory constituencies up north in a bid to buy votes. If it happened during an election, it would be a criminal offence. It's what they call pork barrel politics in the US, isn't it, Rachel? Just you seed the areas that you need to elect you with cash, and if all they're getting is a window box in the town centre.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about sort of where I'm from in the northeast, right, they've got some of the highest rates of child poverty in the country, and so you can give a place a new town centre, but if people who live in that town don't have any money to spend in it, or if you're not solving their long-term health problems, long-term health inequalities, then a lick of paint's not going to sort out any of those problems, even though it might get you like a good headline for a day or so. So yeah, I think it's like the risk they're running here by trying to put something out when the government's under so much pressure is that it will kind of just wreck the brand that they've built up with levelling up. So yeah.
Now, John says, we are going to get to this kind of question in a minute, John, so maybe we'll come back to you. But we can't believe the government has stopped these energy companies raising these ridiculous prices on fuel and tax. The British people will not be able to pay and will die of starvation and outside help schemes and so on. There's a lot of problems with the cost of living crisis, energy prices, so on and so forth. On page 2, there's some talk, and it's happening elsewhere. It's one of those things they're throwing out as a bit of red meat to say there's going to be some legislation to remove EU laws from British law. And they're going to pass a new law saying we don't want any of the EU. You'll make it easier to get rid of it. But they're not using the powers they've got already with Brexit. You could already take the VAT off energy bills. You don't need to pass a law for that. You just need to say it's happening. You don't need to pass a law saying we're not going to follow these rules anymore. You just repeal the old ones or something. You don't need to do all this. It does seem like a lot of blether and not a lot of doing.
I feel like this is the sort of 50th front page I've seen that talks about cutting EU red tape and a big promise to do it, and that's the next big thing, that we're cutting a lot of red tape. But as you say, point me to what red tape, what actual...
Where is the mountain of slash red tape? all we've got is a massive pile of red tape. I went to get some fish and chips at the weekend, right? Cod before Brexit was £4.30 a piece in my local shop, £6.30 now.
Christ.
That's not less red tape, and that's not a better standard of living. Although, you know, that's why fish and chips are a treat. Anyway, I'm going to do something I don't often do on news. I'm going to read a piece out from The Sun today. Now, Conor Burns, who's the MP over the weekend, last week, who was the one who said that Boris Johnson had been ambushed by a piece of cake. This is him, right? And he says about the Prime Minister, which is very much talking on the positive blether side of things. This is a man in the prime of life who is fizzing with energy. Steely in determination, and with an agenda to improve the lives and communities of every person in every part of our great country. His faith in the British people is absolute, and his determination to deliver for you is total. And the infidels are not at the gates of Baghdad. Saddam will be victorious, and there's nothing anyone can say otherwise. The Allies are lying to you. What? I mean, this is obviously, Rachel, just a naked bid for a minister's job. It's just a job application, this thing in The Sun. But a man fizzing with energy in the prime of his life. He looks like a truckle of cheese on legs. Some stories planted by Carrie, probably, saying, oh, he's on a diet, he's cut out the wine and cheese, he's losing loads of weight since his burst with COVID. He's bigger than ever. What? How do they think this is going to play? How can they keep saying he's brilliant, he's dynamic, he's clever, he's slim, when the evidence of our eyes is the opposite?
Conor Burns has been like an ally of the Prime Minister for years and years. You know, they kind of go back quite a long way. So it's not surprising that he's the one sent out to brief on his behalf. And I think this is part of the project strength. Say everything is fine in big capital letters, so people can be kind of, because we sit now and talk about how insane it is that they make that suggestion, and I think that's part of the strategy, is to kind of be almost like a little bit ridiculous in how positive and how flowery your language is, and how you can.
Well, it's worked for him, hasn't it, for 30 years? So the flowerier you become, you know. He's not an Ernest Hemingway character. His brevity is the most important thing. But this is where we are, it would seem. But it does seem like the British people are starting to see through it a bit. So there is a new poll reported today on page 2 of the Mirror, which shows that more people are now backing Labour to handle the economy than the Tories, 42% to 36%. And that's only going to get worse, probably, because the national insurance increase is coming in April, isn't it, Rachel? Despite what some Tories would like. Is this poll, because the Tories have always been seen as the ones who are most frugal and best to handle the nation's finances, but COVID and national insurance and 12 billion with this and 6 billion there, and we've lost £4 billion somewhere to fraudsters. It is all starting to really undermine that central part of the traditional Conservative, bid for popularity with the electorate. And if Labour is now ahead on how they spend the cash, the Tories must be really worried about that sort of thing.
Yeah, this is it's always been the Labour Party's weak spot, is the economy. You know, when you think about the last election, the Shadow Chancellor obviously was John McDonnell, and one of the things that kept coming up in focus groups, kept coming up all the time, was that the promises that Labour was making were just, people didn't buy them, you know, like free broadband. They just didn't think that they were credible. So it's kind of pretty remarkable that Labour's new Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has been able to turn it around in the way that she has, and kind of she's whenever you ask a sort of another member of the shadow cabinet like about what policies they want and things, they sort of will refer you, oh well, you'll never get any money out of Rachel. She's known to want to restore faith in how people view the Labour Party and how it's able to handle money. But then you look at kind of some of the mistakes that the government has made over the last couple of years during COVID. The perception now is that they have handed a lot of money to, Tory cronies, that they have spent an awful lot of money, for example, on test and trace, which was not very effective. There's a lot you see. It seems to be like day after day, you see another story about government waste. And the most recent of these is that sort of, I think it's about 4 billion that the government's having to write off because of COVID loans and basically fraudsters who've been able to claim money, and they don't see that they're going to find any way to recover the money that they've given out to criminals, essentially.
They don't seem to care too much. So Rishi Sunak has, written off 4.3 billion, but it says he's going to stop people claiming £125 a month working from home allowance from a taxman, which is worth about a ninth of that. It's worth significantly less, and it's taking money out of our pockets while not worrying too much about the money that's gone into fraudsters' pockets. Now, Christian says, constant Tory lies and promises are a constant reminder to us all of the deep down corruption that's always been fed to us all. It's disgusting, the lot of them. There does seem to be an awful lot of disenchantment with things. But do you think there's a possibility, Rachel, that the Tories will be banking on people like Christian there being so disenchanted and disengaged they don't vote for anybody, and therefore the Tories get in again by default?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say at the minute, isn't it? Because this isn't a campaign period. This is kind of the day-to-day government. So I think we don't really have either party, or any of the parties rather, setting out their stall. They're not saying here are all of the policies that we want you to vote for. So I think at the moment it's kind of we're in a period where the government is being scrutinised for what it's doing currently, rather than here's a reason to get behind this agenda. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting question, actually, because all of the Partygate revelations, it is damaging trust in politics generally, in how institutions are run generally, and I think there is a deep frustration with that, which who's going to win the next election will have to have an answer to. They're going to have a here's why you can trust the government.
Yeah. Oh, the Keir Starmer at the moment would be doing quite well if he just changed his name to not Boris Johnson. Tick, tick. Every Labour candidate should be doing that. Now, John says, if they called a general election soon, who do you think would win it? I think, John, if they called a general election in 50 years' time, Boris Johnson would still lose it. I don't know about who would win. I don't know if you get a clear or outright winner, but I do think you'd be goodbye Boris no matter what, because you win and lose general elections long before the ballot box usually. And Pippa says in her story here about the poll that no party has ever gone on to win a general election after being in the Tories' position now in the polls. It would be, well, say unprecedented, but everything about Boris Johnson seems to be unprecedented. But it would be very, 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 very unlikely that any government could go on to win from this. So what do you think, Rachel?
Well, when you look at how far behind the Conservatives have been, sort of 13, 14 points, I think they were behind in one poll behind Labour. So I think, but at the minute they have a Prime Minister who does not look likely to be the Prime Minister at the next election, so I think it's very, very hard to say who's going to win at the moment. But, I think the Conservatives have been in power for 11 years now. In the last 6 years, we've seen 3 failed prime ministers. So I think it's very difficult for the Conservative Party to look new again, regardless of who they pick.
Change, always hopey, changey optimism always sells quite well, which is of course what Boris did in 2016 and again in 2019. I'm going to do something new, and not really necessarily working. Mavis says, I'm so fed up with the corruption and lies. Does Boris really think we believe him? The problem is, I wrote a comment about this on Friday, Rachel. The problem with someone who has spent a long time lying to people is that in order to make those lies believable, you have to sort of half believe them yourself. And so he's in an alternate reality where he is always the wronged party, where that lady did just take her knickers off and sit on him, where those wedding vows weren't quite broken there. It was more of a fracture, you know. So he's so used to being in a more positive, a Boris positive situation, that he genuinely, I think, Mavis, he genuinely doesn't get it. He doesn't see what he's done, because no one's ever told him that's wrong, I'm going to divorce you. No one's ever said this is, you know, you can't do that or you will lose your job. It always seems to be that he's managed to survive. So from his perspective, he's always been right so far, hasn't he?
I think there is something to that, and I think when you consider how the party has sold Boris Johnson, they always say, "Oh, it's priced in." All of these, you know, all of your criticism of Boris Johnson are priced in, and the voters love him anyway. And I think that line only holds up to a certain point. And I think once the dam breaks on that, I think it can, you know, the power can flood out of someone like Boris Johnson pretty quickly. You know, if you kind of say, well, people just accept that he is dishonest, you know, people just accept that. I think when it comes to a moment when the country really needs to have faith in him, during the Partygate revelations, like when a prime minister stands up in the Commons and says, I'm outraged by these parties, I think you can't make those things a positive attribute at that point, because people just want some honesty. And I think that's kind of the position that he's in at the moment. And I think that's why his team around him probably think his only option now is to project strength and to go back to trying to get that line to hold again, that it's all priced in.
Yeah. And the trouble is that the fact that everyone knew he was dishonest to start with, and that he was incredibly charming, and that therefore you could welcome him somehow into your world, despite the fact that he was dishonest, means that when he's done something that most people would find pretty unforgivable, which is partying while people are dying and you've told other people not to party, that means because you've taken him in, he's offended you personally. It's not a prime minister doing something theoretically bad over there. It's happened right here to someone that you had some, not trust or faith, but that you liked, a friend in a way. And it's like a friend has betrayed you rather than just a prime minister. And that's why it's so visceral, I think. That's my theory anyway. Don't know how much it stands up if Boris Johnson's not friends with anybody. But anyway, yes, that's a nice note to end the stories on, I think. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Boris's prospects for the future? Do you think he's right to be confident? Do you think Sue Gray's all going to blow over and it's not going to matter? Do you think Conor Burns is in any way a believable human being? What do you think about the levelling up plans? Are you confident that those are going to happen, or do you think that it's just a little bit of hot air, as Rachel says? Get into the comments and let us know. But first off, there is a bit of good news. Here it is. Now, something else that Boris Johnson wouldn't be able to get his head round is the fact that more people are holidaying in Blackpool than before the pandemic. So this is great news for the hoteliers and leisure businesses there, who really suffered over the past couple of years, and not just the pandemic, but before then as well, as it was sinking in popularity. Their Lancashire seaside resort has had 12 million visitors in the last 3 months alone, compared to 9 million 2 years earlier. It's gone up by a quarter. Just in autumn, Rachel, in winter, when Lancashire is its least hospitable. Now, does this show that the Brits, if not the Bullingdon boys, are figuring out that you don't need to stay in a millionaire's villa to have a nice time?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I used to go to Blackpool quite a lot when I was a kid. So I've got sort of pretty good memories of Blackpool, actually. And it's
not really what you said before we came on air.
Well, you know, I kind of like... it's not somewhere I'd fancy these days, because I think the last time I went to the Tower Lounge, I just wouldn't fancy it. But maybe some of my drinking days are behind me now. But yeah, it's really struggled as a town over the last few years, as has a lot of seaside towns. So if it's doing a lot better these days, that's good to hear, good to know.
Exactly, the jobs and the people there deserve it, and also, of course, the cost of living crisis. That even when they lift the travel restrictions, people still aren't going to be able to afford to swan off to hotter climes necessarily. Lancashire it is, lass. Nothing wrong with that. Right, thank you for joining us, Rachel. Have we got any more questions before we wrap up? Let's ask our little producer in the background if we've got anything else coming up. I'm not sure that we do. It looks like there's nothing there. Oh, yes, we do. June. I thought it was new Jean Whitfield for a minute. What a disappointment. Sorry, Jean. The coronavirus bill goes on until March 2022. These are the restrictions. It must be overturned for us to be free people. You are a free person, Jean. You can do as you like in this country. It just simply says there are some things that you ought to do to care for other people and ensure that they can be alive, which is one of the essential ingredients of freedom. But she's got a point though, Rachel. These coronavirus restrictions, which the bill enabling that to sort of be enforced, does go on until March. Although they've lifted a lot of the restrictions now, they could in theory bring them back until then. Are they going to get to March and go, well, I rip that up now, or are they going to keep it on the books?
Well, I think anyone who tries to make predictions about the COVID pandemic goes on to look very stupid. So I will hold back on saying that they'll bid all of the measures full time after March. But every sign we're getting at the minute is a positive sign that the pandemic is ending, and that we can look forward to not having to deal with them this time next year, any of the restrictions. So I think there are plenty of reasons to be cheerful on the COVID front, not least that Omicron's not turning out to be the disaster that we all thought it was going to be.
No, exactly. And I'm sure that Boris Johnson will probably still be around in March, depending how bad Sue Gray's report is. And he may wish to tear it up, have a bonfire of COVID restrictions in order to try and shore up support for himself. Now, Paul says, Blackpool's a brilliant place. I'm moving there soon. There you go, Rachel. Well done, Paul, for supporting Blackpool. Go and spend your money in the local shops, local businesses, local hospitals. What people don't realise is when you have seaside resorts that only get holiday visitors, whether it's in Cornwall or Devon or Somerset or Wales or anywhere else, is that the schools and the hospitals in those areas get funding per head. So if those that have like sort of, empty holiday cottages and hotels that aren't always fully used, things like that, they don't have children that go to the local school if you have a second home somewhere. And so therefore that school doesn't get funding. Therefore they lower their Ofsted ratings. Therefore they don't have as much educational attainment. Therefore the people in that area have less chance of being able to afford to live in that area when they grow up and work there. They don't create businesses. So if you have second homes and you stop people living there as a community, then it massively destroys that town. And I'm glad for Blackpool that they're getting some jobs and stuff going and people like Paul going to live there, because living somewhere is what makes it a community and brings the funding in to make it all work. Second homeowners, not so good. Anyway, sorry, that's my rant for a Monday afternoon. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We'll see you again on Wednesday when it'll be Prime Minister's questions. And hopefully by then, Sue Gray will have been and brought us all a present. Wouldn't that be nice? Thanks for taking part, everyone. And we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.